All right, so we're gonna move on forward here with our Middle Ages, and specifically in this lecture, we're gonna be looking at some British history in the Middle Ages. The big event is the Norman Conquest of Britain that we're gonna spend some time on, 1066. If you're not familiar with that date, it's a date that basically every school child in England knows. It's a very famous moment in British history, and also something we actually get from this event that still impacts us today in a very profound day-to-day manner, and I'll explain that when we get to it. And then another document I'm not really going to spend much time on, but you've probably heard of before, Magna Carta. So it's a fun story, the Norman conquest of Britain. You got to kind of follow it carefully, so I'll just kind of go through it step by step with you. And again, this is all information for your quiz 3, right? So keep that in mind. All right, so here we go with our first set of keywords. So go ahead, get some of these down. Some of these might look familiar to you. And so this is going to be kind of the setup. I'm going to go to a map here in a moment. Then I'm going to go through some more keywords explaining everything to you. So first of all, get all these words down, right? And if you need a pause, pause, get them down, and then I'm going to move forward. Okay. All right, so here you have our map of Britain, and I'm kind of using this map to help you understand what's going to bring about the Norman conquest of Britain in 1066. So we have to give a little back story, right? So we talked about Britain before, and we know how this island of Britain was under Roman control from the time of Claudius. Then we know they built Hadrian's Wall, and the Romans controlled this piece of real estate very well until those Germanic invasions, specifically the Angles and the Saxons. And if you remember in the 400s, the Angles and the Saxons go in, they conquer Britain. Eventually, the Angles and the Saxons merge together, and we get what we call the Anglo-Saxon kings of Britain. And basically, from the fall of Rome until the year 1066, technically, it is these Anglo-Saxons who are in charge of much of Britain. Um, and these Anglo-Saxons are German. And, I want you to think about this for a second, because when you think of England today, do you think of England being German? And the answer should be no, right? But for hundreds and hundreds of years, England was dominated by these Germans, these Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes that invaded and conquered Britain. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Meanwhile, there's another piece of the puzzle you need to know about to understand this story. During the years of about 900s or so AD, around 900s AD, if you remember, here it says Frankish Kingdom. Remember the Frankish Kingdom? We did a pretty long lecture on them, right? And there, the northern part of the Frankish Kingdom, right, was invaded. Who invades the northern part of the Frankish Kingdom around the 900s periods of time? Well, you might have a pretty good hint if you know what we call the northern part of France. What do we call the northern part of France? Normandy. If you think of World War II, the D-Day invasions at Normandy, right? Why is the northern part of France called Normandy? Well, we call the northern part of France Normandy because the people who conquered it were Normans. Who are the Normans? The Normans are the Northmen, Norsemen, Vikings, all the same. They're basically people from the Scandinavian countries that sweep in and conquer the northern part of what is today France. And so they come from a few places. Denmark actually is quite a few come from there. But these Scandinavians, these Northmen, Norsemen, Vikings, whatever term, they're all fine. They conquer the northern part of France. So by the time we get to, the 1000s, just the round number of 1000 AD, right? You basically have a situation of the Anglo-Saxons in control of Britain and the Normans in control of the northern part of France. Now, the other thing that's important to note is it's not that far apart for the two, right? And so over the years, as the Anglo-Saxons are living in Britain and the Normans are living in the northern part of France, the two cultures are going to start to interact with each other a lot, even intermarry with each other a lot. And so they become pretty connected in many ways. So all of this is important because that's all the setup for the next set of words I'm going to show you that it's going to get us to the Norman conquest of Britain in 1066. So I hope all that's kind of clear to you and you understand where we're going with this. So let's move on. So here you have the key names of the people you need to know during the events leading up to the actual conflict of 1066. They're all important. You want to know all of them. They're names of people, battles, kind of a few different things there. So we're going to kind of go through the story here, and it's a little tricky story. We're going to kind of go through it, and I think if you stay focused, you'll be able to get them all down. So we'll start with this first guy named Edward the Confessor. Who is Edward the Confessor? Edward the Confessor is the king of Britain in 1042. Now, what you need to know about these individuals as we go through the story here and how we get the Norman conquest of Britain is who's Norman and who's Anglo-Saxon. So Edward the Confessor, he's the king of Britain, and he is Anglo-Saxon, right? So he's an Anglo-Saxon. He's an Anglo-Saxon, and he's ruler of Britain. But he's only half Anglo-Saxon. He's half Norman. Remember how you have this interaction between the Norman culture and the Anglo-Saxon culture, and Edward the Confessor was a product of that. Because his father was Anglo-Saxon, his mother was Norman. And so he was half Anglo-Saxon, half Norman. Well, that didn't make everybody in Britain happy. And there was one guy in Britain who really was not liking this, a man named Harold Godwin. Harold Godwin, his title was Earl of Wessex, and important guy, not just some average Joe. And he did not like the fact that his king was half Norman. Harold Godwin, of course, pure Norman, pure Anglo-Saxon. So Harold Godwin tries to overthrow Edward the Confessor. He tries and he fails. All right, so he's not doing a very good job of it. He tries and he fails. So now what? Well, we get ahead and we kind of jump ahead, and Edward the Confessor continues to rule until this very important year, 1066. In 1066, Edward the Confessor dies. Natural causes. When Edward the Confessor dies, he didn't have an heir. He didn't have a son. What do? Well, you appoint somebody. The problem is this. There are two different people who claimed that Edward named them to be their heir. Who are these two people? Well, one of all people was the son of Harold Godwin named Harold Godwinson. And Harold Godwinson is, of course, an Anglo-Saxon. The other person that Edward the Confessor apparently told would be able to rule over over Britain, was this man named William the Bastard. And William the Bastard, he's going to get a different name later. They call it William the Conqueror, but for now it's called William the Bastard. His whole thing is he's Norman. He's from Normandy. And so what you have a situation of in 1066, Edward the Confessor dies. He names Harold Godwinson apparently to be the heir. At least that's what Harold Godwinson claims. And he names William to be the heir. And so now you got two guys, one Anglo-Saxon, one Norman, both claiming to be the king. So what ends up happening is Harold Godwinson, he's already in Britain, and he takes the title. He says, I am king of Britain. He takes the title, takes the throne, I am the king of Britain. Doesn't take long for word to spread down to Normandy when William hears about this. And William's like, what are you talking about? I should be the king of Britain. Why does William say he should be the king of Britain and not Harold? Well, William gives actually two reasons. One reason he says is, well, Edward told me I could be king. But he gives another interesting reason. And this other reason is something that happened a couple of years earlier. So if this is kind of a movie, this is a flashback. So about 2 years earlier, 1064 roughly, Harold Godwinson was sent by Edward the Confessor to Normandy. We don't know why Edward the Confessor sent Harold Godwinson to Normandy, but he sends Harold Godwinson to Normandy. Harold Godwinson goes to Normandy and he's captured. He's captured in Normandy by a guy named Count Guy. A guy named Guy. It's actually pronounced Guy, G-U-Y, Count Guy. So Count Guy captures Harold Godwinson. Who comes to the rescue and liberation of Harold Godwinson? You guessed it, William the Bastard. Because William the Bastard was an important guy in Normandy. And as a result of that, William says to Harold, well, I'm going to get you released, but you have to promise to be my vassal. And so 2 years, we jump ahead 2 years again in 1066. William says I should be king for two reasons. One reason is Edward said I could be king. And two, Harold's my vassal. If he's my vassal, there's no way he could be the king instead of me. Now it's interesting because Harold denies this happened. Harold says maybe, he helped me out, but I never promised to be his vassal. If I did, there was no relic involved. There's some interesting details on this. But at the end of the day, William is going to use this as his argument. So then we get to 1066, and Harold Godwinson is the king. So I'm going to go to the map to explain the last two terms here because what's about to happen is pretty significant. So it's 1066. Harold Godwinson is the king of Britain. And in 1066, when Harold Godwinson is the king of Britain, there is an invasion coming into the northern part of Britain. All right, so there's this big battle in the northern part of Britain. Harold Godwinson is the king. This is in September of 1066. September of 1066. And I'll show you why in a second I'm putting the month, right? September 1066. So Harold Godwinson goes up here, a place called York, and there's this big battle called the Battle of Stamford Bridge that Harold Godwinson is fighting against other foes of his in Britain. Now, again, I used to make students actually know the name of that battle. I know I put it up as the key words, but I'll tell you the story. One time I went to Britain, been there several times, and I'm like, oh, I want to go see the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and drove all the way up here. Got to the Battle of Stamford Bridge. You know what was there? Nothing. A stupid little plaque that said Battle of Stamford Bridge fought here. So I was very disappointed. So I'm not going to test you guys on that battle. But what you do want to know is that there was this big, fight up there in September of 1066. Why does that matter? Because in October of 1066, William is coming across the English Channel, which means Harold Godwinson had to go up north, fight a battle, now it's to go back down south. Now you go, he's got a month. Well, yeah, he's got a month, but remember, no cars, no trains. This is all on foot and horse. By the time his men get back, they're tired and worn. And they do meet in 1066 in the other battle, which you absolutely do need to know, the Battle of Hastings. And in that Battle of Hastings in 1066, William the Bastard is, of course, victorious. He gets a new nickname. He's now known as William the Conqueror. Harold Godwinson is killed in the Battle of Hastings at 1066, and William now is controlling Britain, which now means you have your Norman conquest of Britain. So that, in a nutshell, is the Norman conquest of Britain and how the Normans take over. Now, one more key point to this story. Then I'm going to show you something really cool. One more key point to this story, which is this. When the Norman conquest of Britain takes place, I remember I said you don't think of England as being German, but you don't think of England as being Scandinavian either. You get an interesting fusion between these cultures when the Norman conquest is completed in 1066 and the Anglo-Saxons, they fuse and they create something important. What do they create? Let me show you. All right, so if you look at this, these are obviously languages, right? And you look at this language, right? And you look at all of this, it's the same thing. It says, then she went to speak this late modern English tongue, right? This is early modern English. This is Middle English. And this is kind of Anglo-Saxon stuff, right? And this one right over here is 1066. And the reason I point that out to you is look at the jump between this and this. It's dramatic. And one of the big contributions we get as a result of the Norman conquest of Britain, the fusion of these two cultures, is what brings about our modern English language. So this is how we get our English language. It's from the Norman conquest of England. If that didn't happen, we'd all be speaking a very different language today. We'd be speaking something, I don't know, maybe more with German background. Who knows? But it's very interesting. By the way, if you ever read Shakespeare, Shakespeare's early modern English, right? If you want to read a whole bunch of Middle English, that's something like the Canterbury Tales, Chaucer, if you ever read any of that. All right, a side note, but it's important. It's definitely something worth noting, the whole development of our English and one of the contributions, right? We always talk about contributions. Anytime I say that, remember, we didn't forget about that from the beginning of the semester. We're still on that, so we have all these contributions from other civilizations that still impact us today. Remember when we talked about the birth of France and Germany? That's a contribution from the Franks, right? So these are all things that still impact us today. All right, now there's one more part to this story that I want to share with you because as the Norman conquest of England was complete, it was documented in a primary source, but not a normal written primary source. Instead, it was documented on this amazing tapestry, something called the Bayeux Tapestry. So I'm going to kind of run through the Bayeux Tapestry here with you and show it to you. I don't know if you're familiar with it, not familiar with it. It's pretty cool. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but it's basically 210 feet long, about 20 inches wide, and it tells the story of the Norman conquest of Britain. So let me just kind of go through some of it. I'll kind of explain. So this is kind of the beginning part of the tapestry. And you see here, this is King Edward over here, right? That's King Edward. And he's telling Harold over here to go to, here's Harold, there's the word mayor, Mayor-see. He's telling him to go to Normandy. So this is kind of where the tapestry starts. So again, this is all hand woven. You see kind of the story here, the major stories in the center. If you want to Google and look at the whole thing, you could. I'm just kind of show you some selected pieces of it. And then the margins, sometimes you have things relating to the story, sometimes they're random, but you have that. So anyways, this is what the Bayeux Tapestry. Now, I'm showing you bits and pieces. This is one long connected tapestry that's 210 feet long. I went to see it in person. It's in a museum in actually northern France called the Bayeux Museum. It's really neat. It's really thick, very well maintained. I'm surprised how good condition it is considering how old it is. All right, a couple of sounds there. But here's another part of the tapestry here, and here's the part where, I don't know if you can see, it says Harold apprehended. This is where Harold is captured by that guy named Count Guy, and then William comes to his rescue and all of that. So that's in this tapestry. Um, this scene here is where William is telling Count Guy to release Harold, and he's telling him, release Harold. I think it's this guy up here. Says, release Harold, let him go. And this is the thing that William is later going to use to argue that he should be the king instead of William. So this is all neat. It's all part of history. Once the fighting is over, this is an interesting scene right over here. This is where the oath is supposedly taking place, where this oath of homage and fealty, remember those terms, that William is telling Harold to take to him. So this is Harold making that oath to William. And this is why William again later says, oh, Harold's my vassal. Who makes this tapestry, by the way? William's people, right? We don't know specifically who made it, but it was made by William's people. So, of course, they're going to put that in the tapestry. This is another interesting image part. This is the part in 1066 after Edward dies. So this is kind of the death of Edward here. And this is Harold right in the middle here, becoming the king. It says Harold, it says Regis. He's holding that little orb and all of that. So this is going on there. This is also kind of cool. I don't know if you could see it up here in this little corner. I don't know if you know what that is. That's a comet. That's actually Halley's Comet. And that was even put in there, so it shows you the significance. Actually, comets were seen as bad omens at the time, and so if you ever look at the Bayeux Tapestry, there's so many little details. Again, I usually when I do this in class, I go into more detail on it, but I'm just kind of give you a few kind of the cool things on it. So, anyways, you got Halley's Comet there. Here's just another nice scene here. Here they're kind of building boats here, and they're collecting their armor. This is like the chainmail armor that they would use at the time. They're chopping trees, building boats. So this is William getting ready to go on this invasion. And then these are very iconic scenes of the ships, and William is sailing across the English Channel to go, of course, fight Harold at the Battle of Hastings. And here's them. They're preparing. They're landing. They're preparing their meals. Very detailed stuff here. They're hunting, and here they're cooking. Just very detailed stuff here. And then the armies meet. A little bit of a roar sound there, right? And the armies fight, and they start meeting. And you'll see it's pretty brutal actually in some of the fighting. You have some arrows, archers. I don't think you can see any. Yeah, on this one you could see the bodies, right? You can see like the decapitated bodies here on this image in the margins. So, it gets really intense, this fighting. Even in this tapestry, you could see in some of the images, the horses flipped over and people's bodies being torn apart. So that's pretty intense. And here's just another couple scenes of the tapestry. more fighting at Hastings. This is a close-up of William removing his helmet. There was rumors during the battle that William was killed, so he actually removed his helmet during the battle to show everyone who's still alive. And even there, that's in the tapestry, so I thought I'd just show you a close-up of that. And at this point, somewhere over here, Harold is killed. So that's even in the tapestry. So, it's pretty cool. And then Harold is killed. William is, of course, victorious. At that point, Harold's men all run away, and then the tapestry kind of comes to an end. You can see it's kind of a bit torn off. We believe there might be a little bit more of the tapestry left that was made that was later destroyed or disappeared, probably showing the coronation of William as the new king of Britain. So it's a cool little thing. I kind of just gave you a brief overview of it. So just definitely know the Bayeux Tapestry, right? Make sure you're familiar with its, what it is. You don't have to worry about every detail that I kind of described to you in it, but you do need to know the whole story of the Norman Conquest. So anyways, it's something kind of cool, neat little primary source to share. All right. All right, so now just the last thing I want to kind of cover here in this little lecture on some British history in the Middle Ages is the story of Magna Carta. And Magna Carta, very famous year, 1215 Magna Carta, is something that transpires as we jump ahead. So 1066, right, that was the Norman Conquest. We jump a whole bunch of stuff. Henry II. If you remember Henry II, the story with him and Becket, that was in the year 1170, right? If you remember 1170, that was Henry II. Henry II eventually comes back to power. He dies. When Henry II dies, before he died, he had 4 sons. 2 of them died early, 2 outlived him. The 2 sons that outlived him were Richard and John. And Richard first comes into power in the late 1100s period. And when Richard comes into power, he's very famous. We'll talk about him more in the next lecture. He's involved in the Crusades. This is the famous Richard the Lion-Hearted, and he's involved with the Crusades. Problem is he basically bankrupts England, causing the Crusades. Fighting the Crusades. He dies, and when he dies, coming back from the Crusades, he's going to be replaced by his brother, King John. So King John, his brother, in the early 1200s, now inherits a very bad situation in Britain. Bad economy, struggles, and he needs money. He goes after the people who have money. Who the people who have money? The nobles. The nobles are not happy. And so in that year, 1215, the nobles in England forced King John to sign this document called, or seal technically, this document called Magna Carta, translates to Great Charter. I'm not going to lecture on this. Instead, it's in your Beatty book. It's one of the primary sources. I want you to read it. I want you to be somewhat familiar with it, just kind of know what it's about. I may or may not add another little video about it as well for you to watch. I don't know. I'll see. But definitely, you just read it. It's in your Beatty book. There's a tiny bit in your textbook. But if you just read the primary source, you're fine with it. And that's it. Just kind of know what it's about, what it does, what it doesn't do. One of the things about Magna Carta, this is not the birth certificate of democracy, right? This is 1215. We're still centuries away from that. But it is a point, at least in British history, where the nobles try to limit the king a bit. It's the British monarchy is going to go through its roller coaster rides after this for sure. But it's an important event, and I just want you to be familiar with it. So, I'm going to leave that since it is in your primary source. I'm just emphasizing to make sure you read it because it's pretty important. All right, so that's a little bit about some British history. Norman Conquest of England, know about all that, Bayeux Tapestry, read up on Magna Carta, and we're good to go. All right, that's it. And next lecture should be on the Crusades, and that's going to be a lot of fun. All right, that's it. Bye. Bye, guys.